sharing your Saturday afternoon and evening with us. As a guy who gets invited to speak places, it's an honor when somebody says, hey, we're going to have an event, we're going to have guests in our house, and we want you to speak to our guest. That humbles you. It's a compliment. I appreciate your trust, and I look forward to not only studying with you, but fellowshipping in the fellowship hall and answering some questions. I know if you've been to one of the larger venues, I look taller. This is what it is. I'm a harmless grandfather, so while we're eating, if you want to sit down and ask me questions about my wife or her Spanish water dogs or some of the other hobbies that I have, I'm approachable. I'm not, I don't have a bodyguard or anything, so feel free to get to know me and become friends. I enjoy that part of being at smaller congregations so I can interact with people. I'm a small group guy. One of the things that I do as part of my consulting business is we did leadership trainings on an adventure course. And I ran a couple of those for several years. And I think my forte is 15 or 20 people in a small group doing experiential learning. As it turns out, I sometimes get to do larger groups than that. But I'm so happy to be with you. Your singing is phenomenal. We could just sing more if you guys wanted to. But we've got a lot to do this afternoon and kind of a short time to get there. So look at Romans chapter 5. Paul is in Corinth, and while he's in Corinth, he's writing a letter to a group of Christians he's never met. This letter is going to be delivered by a lady who's married to a deacon. Her name is Phoebe. Now, a lot of times you read in the Bible a deaconess named Phoebe, and we get all cranked up. They call her a deaconess. Well, what do you call a female lion? A lioness. This is a lady who's married to a deacon. That's all that means. She hand-delivered this letter to the Christians in Rome. And the reason, everything you get after the book of Acts, and if you don't understand the way the New Testament is organized, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who is Jesus and what does it mean to serve him? That's all it means. You got 4 different perspectives of the same story. Now, why do you need 4 different perspectives of the same story? Well, you've got a Jewish perspective, that's Matthew. You've got a Roman perspective, that's Mark. You've got a Gentile perspective, that's Luke. And you've got a philosophical perspective, that's John. Well, after you get these views of Jesus, and some of those things in the Gospels won't be exactly the same, but actually that's a plus. If these 3 teenage boys get in trouble, I don't know, they write something nefarious on the barn with spray paint or something, and I bring them in one at a time to an interrogator's office, and their story perfectly matches, I know it's rehearsed. I know it's a fake. I know they're lying. We were driving 37 miles an hour when we left. We were driving 37 miles an hour when we left. We were driving 37, and then the kid who scared us says, we were doing 100. It's just one of those things. The Gospels basically have these perspectives. If we walk out here on the side of the road and my little pickup truck runs into a smart car, I'm not sure there's any smart cars in Neosho. They're in Huntsville. We have a bunch of engineers there. We like to sit out on the afternoons and tackle them in intersections. But anyway, you have these little smart cars. And if I hit one in my truck and said, hey, what happened? You'll get a perspective from the guy in the truck. Hey, what happened? You'll get a perspective from the guy in the smart car. Hey, what happened? You'll get a perspective from the guy with a cell phone filming it. And all 3 of those things will have the essential details, but some of the details won't exactly match. That's because you spotlight or you highlight things going on. Does that make sense? This means yes? It means no? Not voting? All right. So you've got, who is Jesus? What does it mean to follow him? And then when you get to the book of Acts, the actions, the practices of the apostles, it's what did the guys who were trained by Jesus do after Jesus left? And he tells them straight up in Acts chapter 1, you'll be my witnesses. You're going to tell people about me in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. And so you have these guys who followed Jesus traveling into the world, and they'll go to the city of Corinth. They'll go to the city of Colossae. They'll go to the city of Philippi. And you'll see how they interacted and who they taught and what they taught. And then after the book of Acts, you get a series of letters. Letters that these mature first-generation inner circle Christians wrote back to these new Christians who weren't getting it right. They're going to have letters that say, hey, you guys aren't doing the love God thing right, or you guys aren't doing the love your neighbor thing right. And you're going to find out that in the church, they're always going to battle legalism, Judaism, or Gnosticism. One of those three things is going to come up in those letters because they were the things the early Christians weren't getting right. So Paul is writing to a group of Christians he's never met, but he understands what's going on because in the city of Rome, you had Christians that came from a Jewish background, law of Moses, followed Shabbat, unclean, clean food, circumcise your babies, all kind of things like that. And then you had Christians who were Gentiles, and they didn't know any of these special rules. They didn't know anything about food laws. They didn't know anything about the Sabbath day. Paul was saying in Romans 1, you could tell what there was to know about God from things you could see in creation. You can just look and see the way the world is ordered and know that there's a creator. You've got to work on not believing in God to not believe in God. Once they crack the RNA, DNA code, most people with any honest intelligence say a DNA code is information. Information subsumes that there's an intelligence. And so he tells the Gentiles, you didn't have the law, but you didn't keep the law you knew because, instead of worshiping the Creator, you made idols out of stuff that had been created. Birds and lions and tigers and heffalumps and woozles and all that kind of stuff. And he tells the Jews, you had the law and you didn't keep it. But there's this fight in Rome that the Jewish Christians were acting like they were superior to the Gentiles. And then when the Jews got banished from Rome because Judaism and Christianity were seen as sects of one another, the Gentiles ran the church. And then when the Jews came back in, the Gentiles said, well, you guys were in charge, but now we're in charge. And so Paul's writing them a letter to say, hey, listen, everybody who's here has a sin problem. And you can't solve your sin problem being a Jew, and you can't solve your sin problem being a Gentile. The only person who solves your sin problem is Jesus. And Jesus does that because of God. So in the first 4 chapters of Romans, he basically tells them, get over yourselves and quit fighting about this. You're all saved in the same way. You're not saved because you're a Jew. You're not saved because you're a Gentile. You're actually saved because you're a sinner, and you can't fix that yourself. And so he writes this letter to them to solve this early church problem. But after that, he gets to add some additional information. So we're picking up in the middle of a conversation. Now, if you have trouble understanding your Bible, instead of trying to read the entire Bible in a year, pick 1 or 2 books and camp out in them. Now, I'm going to read the book of Romans, and I'm going to read the book of Romans, 7 times this month. And try to read it like a letter. Start at the beginning and read to the end. If you type them out and don't look at them the way they're divided in Scripture, none of them are very, very long. But we tend to divide them in chapters. Well, those numbers between those chapters aren't inspired. Those are arbitrary. Somebody put those there when he was translating and got to go get a Diet Coke and come back. And so you need to read it as a whole manuscript. You read it from the beginning to the end and find out what the flow of thought is. It's called reading it in the global context. And that will help you quite a bit. If that doesn't make sense, pretend that you're in an airport or you're at the bus station or you're sitting in a restaurant and there's a guy and he's on his cell phone, and he's talking to another group of people, and you're listening. Well, the letter to the Romans is one end of that cell phone conversation. And you can eavesdrop on what Paul's telling these guys and figure out what they're talking about simply by the context. So we're in the middle of this conversation. He's already told them the things about the Jews and the Gentiles, and that the Gentiles rejected God, and the Jews had the law but couldn't keep it, and that all of you have a sin problem, and the only way to solve that sin problem is through God's mercy and your faith. And that's it. So we get into the middle of this conversation, Romans chapter 5, verse 1. Therefore, and therefore is almost always a concluding statement. If you look at the shorter letters that Paul wrote, they'll be divided into indicatives and imperatives. An indicative is, here's the information. Now, once you have this information, if this is true, there's something you ought to do about it. That's the imperative. If I gave you some indicative information, hey, the fire alarm is blinking, I hear an alarm going off, I smell smoke from the back, I touch my hand on the door handle and it's warm. If that is true, therefore, we should all exit the auditorium in a decent manner. Indicatives, the sign the building is burning, and the imperative, if that's true, this is what you do. Anytime you see a therefore, he's probably switching from, hey, here's some information, now here's what you should do with this information. So we get a therefore in what we call Romans 5 in the English Bible. Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in the glory of God. So Paul's summarizing what he said. First of all, we've been justified. Justified is a condition, it's a status. Sanctified is a process. So once we're justified, we try to change our lives and live in such a way that we fit that title. It's about consistency. Paul will tell the church in Thessalonica, this is the will of God, your sanctification. It's a process by which we live up to the holiness code of God. He said, but you've been justified. Well, justified is a status. In the book of Romans and the book of Galatians, the word justified will be used 28 times. 26 of those times, the word is used to mean you're not guilty. 2 of those times, it's used to mean you're made righteous. So justified is this word. It's kind of a legal term. And if you want to add an extra syllable to it, God treats us just as if I'd never sinned. God looks at us in our fallen condition, and because of the blood of Christ, because of there's a penalty for sin, and instead of you paying it, Christ paid it, you get to be justified. I ate at a restaurant today and didn't pay for the food. But Josh did. Okay? That's the thing. That's justified. I ate, I got up and walked out. Nobody said anything to me. And if I ever walk out of Walmart and the thing alarms, I just run, just for fun. But anyway, that's what it means. I ate food that I didn't pay for, but somebody else did. That's what your status as a Christian is. God can treat you just as if you'd never sinned. It doesn't mean you didn't sin. It doesn't mean you're not guilty, but it means something happened because of God's law that allowed him to treat you just as if you'd never sinned. Doesn't mean you're not guilty. It means you're guilty, but somebody decided to let you go. And so he said, we've been justified. I work with the city of Huntsville as one of several police chaplains. I've been assigned to their SWAT team as their embedded chaplain. I'm not a shooter. I'm not an operator. I've got a Ninja Turtle vest that doesn't have any bullets on it. And so I get to hang out with these guys. I train with them every week. I get to teach them stuff, but I'm not a cop, but I've been there a long, long time. I was at graduation. We graduated the academy in February, and the range master, got up to present the firearm award, and I was sitting by Diana Golden, her son. They've got an award named after Miss Golden's son, Daniel Golden, and the range master got up, and he was giving out the award for firearms, and I whispered to Miss Golden, I was at the hospital when that guy was born. And now he's the range master. I've been there a long time. If you've been a police officer in Huntsville in the last 33 years and came through our academy, you were in some of my classes. So every cop in town, if they don't know me, at least knows who I am. And I've told my daughter when she was in high school, you don't use the fact that I work with the police to get you out of trouble if you get into trouble. Do we understand each other? And she drove this black RAV4 Toyota, and she worked at a little part-time job when she was in high school. She was coming across South Huntsville, and she was flying low, her little size 4.5 foot on that gas pedal, and whoop, whoop, blue lights caught her. Well, she got pulled over. Young police officer walks up, and she had a customized tag that her grandparents bought her. Her name is Lonnie Beth. We call her LB, and she played libero on the volleyball team. And so she has LBRO, and her number is 10. And so that was her tag. Well, this young cop either was putting the L's in his ones or the ones in his L's. He said, young lady, you're doing a little hot running through this zone here. I've tried to run your tag, and I can't find your tag in the system. She said, well, maybe if I called my dad, we could figure this out. And then she realized, I said, if you use my name to get out of trouble, I'll murder you. He goes, well, who's your dad? She said, I can't tell you, sir. So he goes back to his car, and he runs the thing, comes and says, look, I can't find your tag number here. We need to work this out. And she said, well, I'm going to have to call my dad. And he said, who's your dad? She said, sir, I'd rather not tell you. He said, well, you're going to have to tell me who your dad is. And so they go back and forth. Finally, she says, okay, my dad's Lonnie Jones. He dropped his ticket book, went back and sat on the hood of his car, put his head in his hands. He comes back up, he picks the ticket book up, he takes the ticket out, and he tears it up. He says, have a good day. She goes, oh no. So you've got to write me a ticket. He said, I can't write you a ticket. So you've got to write me a ticket. He said, I can't write you a ticket. Those SWAT guys will kill me if they find out that I wrote Lonnie Jones' daughter a ticket. She goes, oh, please, if I don't get a ticket, he's going to kill me. So, it's, who's going to get killed first is a big deal. But he let her go. I ran into him in town, and I said, so I understand you're just letting felons run willy-nilly across the universe. And he goes, look, there's no way I'm writing that kid a ticket. She's guilty. She was speeding. But he treated her just as if. But now nobody paid for that ticket. My ticket's been paid for. Your ticket's been paid for. Because when Jesus died on the cross, there's a penalty for this, and he paid it, you didn't. He said, therefore we're justified. Now because God treats us as justified, just as if we'd never sinned, and treats us as righteous, not only are we justified, but we have peace with God. I did a topical lesson. I typically don't do topical lessons. I usually do expository lessons. But I did a lesson one time I entitled it The Saddest Verses in the Bible. And I just went through the Bible and looked at the verses that I thought were sad. In my top 3, one of them is David walking up the steps above the gate at Jerusalem when he says, Absalom, Absalom, oh my son Absalom. I mean, it breaks your heart. This tragic story of Absalom and David's love for him. I believe that's how David gets the title of man after God's own heart. David, like all of us, made mistakes and sinned. He wasn't a man after God's own heart because he was perfect. He was a man after God's own heart because he'd take a rebellious, hateful child and love him anyway and was willing to die in his place. That's what I think makes him a man after God's own heart. But that's one of my... The other sad verse is God comes to paradise. He's walking in the cool of the day. That beautiful time of day, the sun's down, it's not dark, but the sun's not shining. Perfect time to get out in the yard and throw a frisbee, shoot your bow, play with the dogs, go for a walk. And God comes in the cool of the day, looking to walk with Adam and Eve, and Adam's hiding. And God says, why are you hiding? And Adam says, because I was afraid. Breaks your heart. That they had this relationship with God. Heaven and earth together, and when God came to the garden, his children ran from him. Paul says, not only have you been justified, but you have peace with God. You don't have to be afraid of God. You got to honor him, you got to reverence him, you got to respect him, but you don't have to be afraid of him. And I read somewhere, I haven't proved it, but in every chapter and every book of the Bible, there's a direct statement or a hinted statement that you don't have to be afraid anymore. He says, not only are you justified, but you have peace with God. You don't have to be afraid. And because of this peace with God, we have access, because of faith, into grace. And grace is defined as unmerited favor. I like to define it as God giving us what you need, not what you deserve. And we get what we need, not what we deserve, because of our faith. So we have access by faith into this grace, and we stand in this hope of the glory of God. And Paul will use hope of glory a lot in his writings. Spend a lot of time in Romans chapter 8, and he'll talk about the hope of glorification. He'll talk about sanctification and glorification. And Paul says there's this hope that this is not the end of your story, and that regardless of what's going on with you, as bad as it can be, it will be much better over here. We'll talk about that after our supper session tonight. But he gives us this information, and if we stop right there, I mean, that's powerful. That's the gospel. Justified, peace with God, hope of glorification, and we stand in that hope, and we have access to that grace because of our faith. But notice this next phrase. And not only that. You ever seen an infomercial where they say, wait, there's more? Well, wait, there's more. What else can there be? I've been justified, treated just as if I've never sinned, just as if I'm righteous. I have peace with God, and I have access to this grace because of faith, and I stand in the hope of the glory of God. Can you tell me anything that's any better news? Do I even need to know anything else better? But not only this, wait, there's more, but we also glory in tribulations. A tribulation is a word that either means a trial or a difficulty or a hardship or a burden. He says not only the fact that you're Christians gives you justification and peace and access to grace by faith, and you stand in the hope of the glory of God, but in addition to that, you get to deal with trouble differently than everybody else deals with trouble. And I think we sometimes have a misunderstanding of trouble. I think we misuse Romans 8:28. All things work together for good of them that love God and are called according to his purpose. I think people have taught, well, everything that happens for a reason and God does it. I don't believe the Bible teaches that. Just because God can use it doesn't mean God caused it. Romans 8:28 shows you how powerful God is, because God can take things that he did not will, he didn't want this to happen, and things that he did not initiate, he didn't put them into motion, and even though they happened, he's so powerful, he can take them and make them do something in our lives. And so when you think about trouble, God doesn't fly planes into buildings, God doesn't kill babies in car wrecks, God doesn't give people cancer. But God can take the things that are against his will, can take the things that he didn't initiate. And why do bad things happen? We live in a planet controlled by sin. Okay? If Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, we wouldn't have some of the problems we have. We live in a planet controlled by sin, and sometimes I get in trouble because of the dumb things I do. Sometimes I get in trouble because I cross paths with evil, and sometimes I get in trouble just because this is a contact sport. I'm not supposed to last long. The human body does not improve with age. All of us came to the planet the same way. All of us will leave the same way. But when you have trouble, when you have tribulation, Paul says because of this process of being a Christian, we can glory, and that word simply means we shine. It doesn't mean we celebrate, but we stand out. You compare how I respond to trouble and how the people who don't have Jesus respond to trouble, there's a stark contrast. One is sparkly and one is not. He says, you glory in tribulations. Now here's the process. You glory in tribulations knowing that tribulations produce perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. When you have difficulties, you have trouble at school, you break up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, your mom and dad go through a divorce, somebody that you're friends with dies, there's a national tragedy, a tornado comes through and wipes places off the map. Anytime you encounter any kind of trouble, there's a process that comes with that. And the process is the trouble, the tribulation, produces perseverance. Now, what is perseverance? Perseverance is a word that means endurance. The old word for that is patience. The other word for patience is long-suffering. You take the word long-suffering, you cut it in half, and you swap the parts, and it's the ability to suffer long. When I encounter difficulty, me learning just to deal with the difficulty does something for me. And you're not doing yourself any favors, and mom and dad, you're not doing your children any favors if you prevent them from dealing with difficulty. I've got a shirt I work out in. It says the University of Adversity. I'm a graduate of the University of Adversity. The only way to run faster is to run faster. The only way to lift heavier is to lift heavier. The only way to go longer is to go longer. And that's no fun. That hurts. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. And when we expose ourselves to hard things, when we don't stay away from things that make us uncomfortable, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is one of the best things you can do in your maturity. I've got a sign in my garage gym. It says, I do things that you will not, so I can do things you cannot. And that's the only way to live life. But the way that happens is when something happens and it's hard and I stay away from it and I don't do it, I don't get any better at it. I don't learn to make peace with it. I don't learn to deal with it. If you can learn to be uncomfortable, if you can learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, then being uncomfortable doesn't matter. I've got a friend, he runs 100-mile marathons. And I said, Jason, why do you run like you run? He goes, because I hate it and it's hard. Well, he's the entry team leader with our SWAT team. He's also a federal marshal. And he says, my workout is harder than anything I'll ever do at work. And if I have to run, get help, if I have to drag somebody out of a building, or if I have to push a car, it'll be easier than what I do on a daily basis working out. So when you encounter trouble, don't dodge it, don't run away from it, because trouble produces perseverance. Now, perseverance, the next word there is it produces character. And character is simply the idea of what you're made of. When you do something that's hard and you stay with it, you finish that class, you stay on that team, you deal with this relationship, and you just don't quit, you just don't give up, it changes your character. I travel a lot. I'm blessed that people ask me to come and do stuff. And most of the travel I do is in my little pickup truck. And I don't know how many times I've been the first guy on the scene of a wreck. And the time that got me the most, I was in Mississippi and I came around this corner and there was a big propane gas truck, and it had obviously hit this little pickup truck. It hit it so hard it knocked the wheels off the axle. And I got there quick enough that I saw a tire spinning in the road. And I jumped out of my car and ran to the truck, and the kid was trapped inside the truck. And the only thing I had to get him out of the truck with was a pocket knife. And I told my wife, I said, man, I need to travel with some stuff that I can get people out of. And she bought me, for our 25th anniversary, that's how long ago this was, she bought me an RMJ Tactical Tomahawk. It's a Cherokee Tomahawk style made out of one piece of metal. And it's indestructible. It'll punch through a Kevlar helmet like a hot knife going through butter. I could chop my way through a brick wall with it. It'll open a car door like a John Wayne can opener. And you know how you make a piece of metal that strong? Heat and pressure. Heat and pressure. Heat and pressure. It's like you temper a knife. You take an old raw piece of steel and you heat it up and you bang on it with a hammer and you heat it and you bang on it and then you dip it into an oil bath and something happens to the ions. They align a certain way and it gets what they call tempered. Now, a piece of metal that's tempered on a Rockwell hardness scale, anything 68 or below it will bend. Anything above 62 is brittle and it'll break. But anything between 58 and 62 is almost indestructible. Perseverance, heat and pressure produces temper. It produces character. It makes you strong from within and from without. And then, if you deal with adversity, if you deal with suffering, suffering is the process, the destination is hope. Knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. Now, what you've got to understand about the biblical word hope, it's not wishing for something. It's expecting something, which is a big difference. See, I hope I see a 140 class buck this year during deer season. Not going to happen. I live in Alabama, okay? But I hope I do. That's not what this is about. This is an expectation. If you're familiar with the little kids that stand around after school waiting for their mom and dad to come pick them up, they don't sit there and wring their little hands. Oh, I hope mom and dad remember to come get me. They're throwing rocks at wasp nests. They're pulling people's hair. They're playing tag. And they just expect eventually somebody, Billy, go jump in the car. They expect mom and dad to be there. It's not even on their mind. When school is out, they go stand out there and they do whatever. They don't stand there wringing their hands. That's what biblical hope is. It's an expectation that God is going to do something in our lives. I was in a Walmart one time with my wife, and our daughter was little. And if I have to go shopping, I have to have snacks. That's just the way the world works. I'm not a good shopper, so you have to feed me. And so we were in this Walmart, and there was a McDonald's inside the Walmart. And so me and Lonnie Beth got Happy Meals so we could shop. And so we're sitting in this little McDonald's, and these three dudes came in. We were on the west side of Huntsville, and the Limestone Sheriff's Rodeo was in town. And these three guys came walking into this McDonald's and Walmart, and they were cowboys. Now, you got to understand, in Alabama, we don't see a lot of cowboys. You probably see cowboys in Missouri. You're near the Oklahoma border. But these were real cowboys. Now, back in those times, we had a lot of people that were fake cowboys. They had real pretty hats and shiny belt buckles. and boots that didn't have any mud on them. These dudes came in, and you could just tell they were cowboys. Their blue jeans were faded on the inside where they'd been rubbed off on saddles. The heels of their boots looked like they'd been scrubbed in the dirt trying to hold a roped animal. Their hats looked like they'd been rolled up and slapped against livestock. And one of these kids walked in, and he was a bull rider. And you could tell this kid's a bull rider. My cousin in Kansas said a bull rider will put a pin in the little star on the end of his spur so it won't rotate. He said you can look at a guy's spurs and tell he's a bull rider. This kid, you look at him and go, he's a bull rider. He had a T-shirt on that said bull rider, and I'm a psychologist, so I know these things about people. So he walks in, he's wearing this shirt that says bull rider, and then when he sat down with his back to me, the back of his shirt said, not if, but when and how bad. He understands his sport. I'm going to get on a 2,500-pound animal and say, you can't throw me off. Well, every now and then the bull wins. He says, it's not if I get hurt, but when I get hurt and how bad I get hurt. He's not very smart, but he's courageous. You doing something that you know is going to hurt and doing it anyway, that's the definition of courage. It's also the definition of stupid. That's why life is hard. Anyway, I could tell this kid's a bull rider because his shirt said that. Well, this is what hope is. Not if, but when. And not how bad, but how big. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope because we're not living on our own strength. We're not living on our own power. We're not living on our own smarts. We can rely on the fact that God is involved in our lives. And if God will take care of justification and sanctification and reconciliation and peace and glory, if God will do that for me, if He's that powerful, can He handle my diagnosis? Can He handle my difficulty? Can He handle my grades? Can He handle finances? Can He handle a house fire? Yeah. Because hope does not disappoint because of the love of God. Let's get this next verse. And hope does not disappoint because of the love of God has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom He has given us. You see, when you think about the hope that God gives us, hope is directly related to love. And the love of God is understanding what God has already done, and God's actions in the past are pretty good predictors of God's actions in the future. As I said earlier, I get asked to speak at a lot of places, and it may shock you, but when you're a traveling speaker and you go speak somewhere, people pay you. I know it makes people uncomfortable. I get paid by Mazda Toyota when I go do a training for them. I get paid by universities when I go do trainings for them. I get paid by the police when I teach a de-escalation class for them. And when you go to a church, they pay you. But for whatever reason, people don't want to know that we pay our preachers. And so there's a deacon who's in charge of sneaking you a check. I call him the deacon in charge of the drug deal. Because you'll be standing there talking to people and you see this guy start circling you like a shark. And you hear the music, no. Well, I went and spoke at this little church in Gurley, Alabama, Gurley. Spoke for Jim Ashworth. Jim Ashworth is so old, they thought he didn't make it to heaven. People in heaven thought he didn't make it. And so I was there. I'm talking to people, shaking hands, and this dude starts circling. I realize, hey, that's the guy. So I make eye contact with him. He makes eye contact with me. He kind of works his way through the crowd. I got a piece of paper, put it in my pocket. I don't know what it was. Well, I get home, take off my pager, take my keys out, take my wallet out, pull this little piece of paper out, start unfolding it. Jackie said, well, how'd you do tonight? I said, nobody went out with their heads on fire. I guess I did okay. I said, uh-oh. She goes, what? I said, I either really did really, really good or really, really bad. She said, what do you mean? I said, I got a blank check. She said, what? I said, yeah, I got this blank check. There's no amount written on it. She said, well, do you think we should pay off the house or pay off the car? I said, well, I'm not sure. I think I'll ask Jim Ashworth. So we waited the next day. I called Jim, and he answered the phone. I said, hey, Brother Jim, this is Lonnie. I need to ask you a question about this check. Oh, what's going on, Brother Lonnie? I said, well, it's a blank check. And my wife wants to know, can we pay off our cars or pay off our house? And this old, wise Christian man said, now, Brother Lonnie, if you really believed it was a blank check, you pay for them both. Because a blank check is what? A blank check. There's not a limit on it. Hope does not disappoint because God's given us a blank check. Now, that doesn't mean you got a license to sin. What it means is there's nothing you can do to make God love you more, and there's nothing you can do to make God love you less. God's love for you is a static constant in the universe. And hope does not disappoint because of the love of God that's been poured out in our hearts. Verse 6, for when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly, and scarcely for a righteous man would one dare to die, yet perhaps for a good man would someone even dare to die. But God demonstrates His love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more than having been justified by His blood, we shall be saved from the wrath. For if when we were enemies with God, we were reconciled through the death of His Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved by His life? Paul says, you know, when you encounter trouble, trouble is a process, but the destination is hope. And you get to that destination because tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and because of that perseverance in character, you have this hope. And it's the love check that God wrote. Hey, God, my house burned down. I can't believe you don't love me. No, I'm on record that I love you. I sent my son to die for you. Hey, God, I got this diagnosis. I've got to have this surgery. I can't believe you. No, you don't understand. I'm on record how much I love you because when you were a sinner, I sent my son to die for you. The understanding of suffering that leads to hope is based in the idea of understanding how much God loves you. And there's nothing you can do to make God love you more. There's nothing you can do to make God love you less. My behavior, my worship, my obedience is an indication of how much I love God. But it doesn't change how much God loves me, because God's written you a blank check, and that's His love. And His love allows us to look at hope, and because of that hope, we can produce character, and because of the character that we should be producing, it gives us the ability to have perseverance. I hope this helps you understand suffering. We're going to be dismissed, or what do we do? All right, cool. Thank you.